The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it.
Hello, this is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineering Watch Radio. Global Alert News Update for the week of February 27th, 2016. Another week of planet Earth under siege continues from too many directions to try to quantify. The atmospheric aerosol spraying assault continues in the skies above our heads, as always. This show talks about issues that mainstream media won't talk about. I have no advertising on this show, no sponsors. I can say what I want. And I appreciate the cooperation from KQMS that allows this show. This show is broadcast throughout Northern California Saturday mornings from 6 to 7 a.m. A recording of the show can be found on geoengineeringwatch.org in the lower left under radio, posted the same day that this show airs. This show airs throughout Northern California, again on KQMS. A 9/11 event in Redding, a free public viewing on March 12th, Saturday, 2 o'clock at the Redding Library. Flyers can be found at Orchard Nutrition and at Redding Radio. This again is a free viewing of a documentary put together by 2,500 architects and engineers that have put their lives and their careers on the line with an unimaginable amount of jaw-dropping data to make clear the official story on 9/11 is virtually impossible. If you don't believe it, come to this event and find out what you don't know and what you haven't been told. We live in a world of lies and delusion, and 9/11 and what really happened is the epitome of that delusion. Again, whatever doubts you have, I challenge you to investigate and find out what you don't know. And you can get a free commercial copy of this jaw-dropping documentary put together, again, by 2,500 architects and engineers from around the globe. There'll also be free copies of the latest geoengineeringwatch.org commercial DVD with multiple presentations on it that outlines in great detail, with testimony from experts like former government scientists, on the climate engineering that is occurring over our heads, disrupting our weather, toxifying our air, soils, and water without any oversight or environmental impact reviews whatsoever. It's been going on for decades. It's going to be hard to hide the climate engineering insanity for much longer. So in the question and answer period after the free documentary viewing, we'll address a lot of these issues. Again, this is a free public event, Redding Library, March 12th, 2 o'clock, from 2 to 5. Also, I've been invited by a professor at Sonoma State University on April 27th to give a presentation there in a 400-seat auditorium to their faculty and students and the public. This is a free event also about the climate engineering insanity. This issue is coming to the light of day. We have also legislation from Rhode Island that's being examined right now. This legislation is available for anyone to look at if you simply search Geoengineering Rhode Island legislation. Again, find out what we're not being told. About the weather, we have Winter Storm Petros, just the latest in a long list of winter weather named theater that's completely engineered. And the hazy skies over our west coast here with our rainless, overcast, featureless, often featureless skies, sometimes with the leftover sprayed dispersions from the aircraft very visible. How many people think the weather in Northern California is still normal? And if you think it's normal, you're not remembering very well to decades past at the storms that used to roll through Redding and drop copious amounts of rainfall. And now even during a record El Nino, by the way, where did El Nino go? We don't hear a lot of discussion about that anymore. We still can't get nearly enough rain. And even though Redding shows near normal rainfall, what's not occurring is the exponential increases in rain that should take place over the mountainous areas around Reading. It's not happening. I live in one of those areas, and we are not getting the percentages of rain that we should get based on what Reading has had. This is called orographic enhancement, when you have excessive rain as the rain moves over topography like mountains. It's not occurring. That's why many of the streams and tributaries are running very, very low in spite of the, quote, normal rainfall. And the weather whiplash, which is also occurring all over the globe, in between the engineered winter theater, is getting worse by the day. We had locations near the East Coast that had 70-degree temperature swings in less than 24 hours. Think about that. Anybody who thinks that's normal is disconnected from reality. What about the record low Arctic ice? Many people have seen headlines to the contrary, false headlines, and I simply ask, with anything I state, for people to think for themselves. Please think for yourselves. Please connect the dots for yourself. Please investigate for yourself, because the military-industrial complex knows that they only have to cast doubt in order to get people to shut down and not do any investigation. That's exactly what they've done with the climate. Pay attention to your own thermometer. Pay attention to your own surroundings and ask yourself, does it really seem like the planet is getting colder, as we've seen some headlines claim we're entering an ice age? I'm not sure what planet those headlines are really referring to, but it's certainly not this planet. The bottom line is human activity, including climate engineering at the top of the list, have done immense damage to the planet, and we are about to reap the consequences of that damage. We already are, in fact. GeoEngineeringWatch.org legal update. Legal teams in Canada and the U.S. are still working furiously toward filing. We hope to have Canada done very soon, and a 60-day notice of legal filing done in the States very soon, which gives notice to agencies that a lawsuit is coming. More announcements on that soon. Headlines from around the globe. Again, what we're not being told. The list is immensely long. It's hard to cover it, but let's start with the economy, because that's where most people seem to be concerned. And this is a misdirected priority, by the way, because we will soon all be concerned about the planet's ability to support life. We can print all the money we want. Won't change what's happening to the biosphere. That facade is over. The environment has historically provided 75% of all global GDP, gross domestic product, for free, no longer. So while we're told the economy is struggling along and perhaps growing in the U.S., absolute nonsense. And we'll see the reality of this very soon. Here's a few headlines. I want to blaze through these because I have an awful lot to cover today. Iraq on the brink of chaos as oil revenues fall. Why is oil revenue falling? Because the industrial militarized machine is grinding to a halt. Another headline, Moody's Gulf banks pressured by oil. Another, the danger of low oil prices for the global economy. A fourth headline, the world is hoarding gold. This was just a taste of what's to come. Another, Eurozone recovery is over. Deflationary pressures intensify as growth slows. One more, Europe's largest bank, HSBC, posts surprise 858 million loss. That's only what we know about. These figures are only what they put forward, just like the quote-unquote unemployment figure, which is completely false. When the unemployment rate goes down because hundreds of thousands have just fallen off the back end of the conveyor and no longer count, people are living in an absolute facade. What matters is the planet's ability to support life, and that's waning by the day. Another headline, German economy takes a blow from weakening global demand. These headlines go on and on and on. Bottom line, the smoke and mirrors facade of mainstream media, whose job it is to hide reality from the public, is breaking down. Those who choose to support and perpetuate that facade should be in many ways considered accessories to the crimes they're trying to hide, especially if those crimes concern public health and welfare. On that note, in previous shows, I have announced that I have been trying, and others have been trying as well, to get our local media people, specifically Mike Mangus, the news anchor for ABC affiliate KRCR, and the chief meteorologist at this ABC affiliate, Mike Kruger, many, including myself, have tried to get these media individuals who claim to represent the local population to meet citizens in a town hall type setting in order to address concern these citizens have about the ongoing climate engineering issue. After 4 separate attempts, a cordial invitation for Mr. Mangus and Mr. Kruger to address citizen concerns in a town hall type setting, finally I got an answer from Mr. Mangus. I want to read that answer and then I will reply to that answer. Again, after 4 separate invitations spanning about a week and a half to 2 weeks, I got a response from Mr. Mangus. And again, Mr. Mangus, who did not cover an event in 2014 in which 500 local citizens attended and which government scientists spoke at, and even city officials and county officials also spoke at. KRCR didn't cover that event at all, nor did the Record Searchlight. And then in a much larger 2015 event, also with government scientists, CEO from the world's largest environmental and engineering consulting firm, speaking at this event, 1,000 people in attendance, no objective coverage of that either. There was a completely spun momentary mention. That's not objective coverage. So if KRCR says they covered that, it's simply not really true. So after, again, multiple invitations for Mr. Kruger and Mr. Mangus to address the public's concerns about what's happening in the skies above their head, here's the response I got from Mr. Mangus. Hello, Dane. I apologize for not responding to your emails. I didn't see them. To be absolutely honest, I blocked them some time ago. He continues, going into the geoengineering debate, I tried to keep an open mind. I listened to you, to your followers, showed up at the seminar you had in the David Marr Auditorium, and did online research. I'm not a scientist. I don't pretend to be. But of the things I could confirm, I have found lies, mistruths, conspiracy theories of all sorts, and not just geoengineering. He states, that forum had a cornucopia of conspiracy theories. Who shot Kennedy? What really happened on 9/11? Did we really go to the moon? Etc. Before I continue with Mr. Mangus's letter, first, in regards to the moon, to my knowledge, no speaker at that event, government scientists, again, a CEO for the world's largest environmental and engineering consulting firm, nobody mentioned anything about the moon. And in regards to Kennedy, 9/11, climate engineering, those are all issues that we should question. We have every reason to question. We have every right to question. Why wouldn't we? Why does Mangus have a problem with that? And the issue at the conference was about climate engineering, period. Reading things like we in the media are being paid off by the government to keep things quiet, or to believe humans are capable of intentionally altering the environment on a global scale for nefarious purposes, or that such an alleged massive operation could be done in complete secrecy, and talking with people in the airline industry whom I have known for years and whose opinion I respect, who literally laugh at geoengineering conspiracies, led me months ago to come to the conclusion that I don't believe it. I do believe geoengineering is being discussed, but not anywhere near being implemented, and certainly not on such a grand scale. He continues, everyone is free to believe what they want to believe, and as I've said before, I'm done with this, and I have been for months. I just don't want to spend any more time on it. Clearly, I have no interest in being involved in any sort of town hall meeting, nor covering any such event. Now, consider that with every one of my invites I sent to Mr. Mangus and Mr. Kruger, it included documents like 750-page congressional documents outlining the full scope and scale of global climate weather modification programs that have been going on since the late 40s and that continue today. It included congressional documents as recently as 2013 for global governance of geoengineering, included list of patents, 150 long, presidential document, 80 pages long from the 60s outlining these programs continuing and expanding at that time, included film footage of these tankers spraying at altitude. So when we have the media who claims to represent the citizens of Northern California, whom those citizens trust for information, and the best they can do for an investigation is to talk with airline industry friends whom they've known and trust. Is that really an investigation? I talk to my friends. and they laugh, so therefore I'm not going to cover this issue? Is that really a responsible journalist? I'm simply asking the question. And I challenge anyone to investigate what Mr. Mangus said. And when he accuses people of lying, I would simply ask this. How is it lying to plead with the public to investigate issues as dire as climate engineering and 9/11, especially if we have, in the case of 9/11, 2,500 architects and engineers speaking out about the issue? Pull this up further. A 40-year avionics engineer, aerospace and avionics engineer, saw this exchange between Mr. Kruger and myself. And here's what he wrote to Mr. Kruger, between Mr. Mangus and myself. And here's what he wrote to Mr. Mangus, to which Mr. Mangus has not replied, because he has no intention of getting at the truth. Again, this is a letter from an aerospace avionics engineer that wrote to Mr. Mangus, and Mr. Mangus received this letter because I saw the copy of the receipt. Hello, Mike. I just read your response to Dane about not covering more geoengineering stories. That may be difficult to avoid. I'm an aerospace avionics engineer of over 40 years with considerable work experience at NASA Flight Research Center at Edwards, working specifically on high-altitude research aircraft designed to study the ozone layer. It was part of the AIRES projects sponsored by NASA. The company I worked for was Aurora Flight Sciences. I don't like conspiracy theories. I want facts. I want data that speaks for itself, no matter who reads it. My first comparison of the data gathered from 2000 to 2005 to data from 2010 to 2015 was very alarming. So alarming that I figured I made a mistake. I am taking more time to cover every line of program and every bit of data before any publication is made. There are 60 gigabytes of data. Before I received this data, I had to promise the Langley Center that they would receive copies of my papers before they go public. That bothered me at the time. Of course, the government wants to oversee and censor anything that's put out by scientists that would expose something they don't want exposed, right? The aerospace avionics engineer continues. Could just be an accuracy check. He continues more. I have emailed Dane on several occasions about my current research and his, and on each occasion, Dane has verifiable data to corroborate his claims. I don't see anything but an intense desire Dane has to try and recover what we have left of this planet before it's gone forever. I agree with Dane, and it would be far easier for him if he just didn't care, but he does, and so do I. This is an intensely painful time, especially when I hold my grandkids. Here's a quote I learned from many years ago. There is a bar to all understanding. It is a contempt prior to investigation. What does that mean? This is from an aerospace and avionics engineer that wrote Mike Mangus in response to Mangus's attempt to deny and spin legitimate climate engineering information presented at a massive community meeting with 1,000 people in attendance, government scientists there, CEOs of the world's largest environmental engineering consulting firm, and Mangus did his best to spin this event, not to cover it, and to deny it, and then got this response again from an aerospace and avionics engineer who makes this statement again, pointed at Mangus. There is a bar to all understanding. It is a contempt prior to investigation. Mangus hasn't investigated anything. He's simply going with the herd mentality of what his friends at the airline industry, when that could be a stewardess, I don't know who he's talking about there. That's not an investigation. I'm simply saying, we the community trust our local media to tell us the truth, and they are not. They've been invited to address citizen concerns, which they have staunchly refused. I sent with these emails photographs of cloud formations that are so incredibly unnatural, and simply asked for an answer from Mr. Kruger, our chief meteorologist, to which he has been completely silent. And if you want to see exactly what I sent to Mr. Kruger and Mr. Mangus, go to geoengineeringwatch.org under the recent column, and you will find the article with the photographs sent. And I would ask anybody listening to tell me if they think those cloud formations are natural. You don't need to know anything about meteorology. What you see will shock you. And these images were taken by NASA. So I'm simply asking for an honest investigation. Again, if people really want to know, come to the Reading Library on March 12th and get hard, critical data that you can evaluate on your own. The avionics engineer finishes. In my research, I have to maintain an open mind. Otherwise, I introduce bias into the overall equation by ignoring or discounting certain data. It is critical I have error-free results. No exceptions. The stakes are way too high for all of us. Mike, addressing Mr. Mangus. Thanks for reading this, and I hope it doesn't, quote, piss you off. That is not my goal. We need to have good news coverage, accurate, unbiased, without fear. We need you, Mike. When I get finished with this project, I'd like your opinion and help. Why would Mike Mangus not answer a letter from a 40-year veteran of aerospace and avionics, an engineer? Because the truth is not part of the agenda they're seeking there. Let's move on. Middle Eastern mayhem continues as Turkey bombs the Kurds. Let's look at what the country's doing as a whole, our country. We have the most effective fighting force against ISIS, the Kurds, admitted by our government, our Pentagon, as being the most effective force, and yet we have U.S. ally, Turkey, member of NATO, bombing the very force that's fighting ISIS most effectively. Does that make sense? It makes sense if you look at the overall context that I've outlined in many recent shows. ISIS was created, spawned, and fueled by Western powers, specifically the U.S. Look up John McCain's connection with ISIS. Look up the way ISIS is being used as a tool to terrorize nations, to terrorize the U.S. population into accepting more and more draconian lockdowns of their civil rights. This is all part of a grand plan that I've outlined that was laid out decades ago, connected to Brzezinski, the advisor to all administrations since Johnson. Look up the grand chessboard and you'll see what's happening. The toppling of the Middle Eastern countries, which Wesley Clark admitted to after 9/11, that he was told that there was a plan to topple all these Middle Eastern countries. What's happened? Look up anything I'm saying. That's all I'm asking. Ignore the political theater with all the political stooges, and I don't care whether it's Trump or the rest. They're all absolute clowns with strings attached to all of them. If you think any of these people is going to change reality and to magically set right all that's wrong in the world, you're living in a delusion. And how many cycles of this do we need to go through before people wake up and realize the train is completely off the tracks? Now, regarding more U.S. allies, again, look at the facts. Who are U.S. allies? Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, brutal dictatorships. But they are not put under the spotlight. There's no fight for democracy with the U.S. Army going to those countries because those countries are partnered with the U.S. They're doing the bidding of the U.S. So we don't really look at the fact that Saudi Arabia is lopping the heads off of political dissidents and hanging them from cranes, that people are being slaughtered in Bahrain where the U.S. Navy has a base, because those dictatorships are going along with the dictates of the U.S. And that's how the system works. It's always been that way. Same in Central American countries, so the slaughter that's gone on there with death squads and connected to the interests, the U.S. interests of U.S. corporations, which is always the bottom line, isn't it? That's called fascism. And that's the system we live under. Fascism. Now, back to the U.S. again, because the chaos abroad is going to continue, because the environment's imploding, because we have now a desperate scramble for remaining resources and control. That's exactly what's happening around the globe. It's not about freedom and democracy. To watch our U.S. military commercials is truly difficult for me, because the hypocrisy is so immense. And I'm not faulting our military brothers and sisters who are signing up for the right motives because they believe the commercials. They believe the facade. And I can only hope and pray that that delusion shatters, because we desperately need our military brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers to wake up to what the military is being used for. A hammer for those in power. That's it. That's what it's for. A lot of great men and women in the U.S. military, I acknowledge that. But if you're doing the bidding of those in power that are carrying out horrible and very destructive acts around the globe, including the spraying that's occurring in the skies above our heads, and you're being told, and this is exactly what's happening, you're being told that this is somehow for the common good, to spray your citizens to participate in these climate engineering programs, you need to investigate for yourself. Don't be like Mike Mangus or Mike Kruger. Investigate for yourself. You have an obligation to your family, to your citizens. That's all I'm asking. Do legitimate investigation, because remember the pilots in Vietnam who sprayed Agent Orange on their own fellow soldiers on the ground were told what you're doing won't harm your fellow soldiers. It's fine. Just follow orders. Just be an order follower. Don't question. That's why we're in such a dark place. Same with depleted uranium that some genius at the Pentagon figured out, made an excellent projectile, the heaviest metal on the planet. It's radioactive forever once it's used, 4.5 billion year half-life. But that was used in Middle Eastern countries like Iraq with horrible consequences to our own troops who were not told they were using radioactive ammunition initially. That's where Gulf War syndrome came from. And so if you support the troops, I support the troops, and if you do or you claim to, you need to investigate what's being done to our troops, because it takes a lot more to support the troops than to slap a sticker on your car that says you support the troops. That's simply a cop-out, a cowardly cop-out. Investigate for real. Now, as far as what else is being hidden from us, we were told that the gas leak in Southern California is all fixed, it's all good, we should go back to sleep. Is that true? For one, pressure's building up in that gas field. At some point it could blow the whole field apart. We'll see if that comes. But in the meantime, in Texas, here's a headline: unstoppable gas leaks in Texas, even worse than California's gas leak. Media silent. Of course the media is silent. I've gone over that earlier in this broadcast, have I not? Because the media feels its job is to pacify the public. That's what they're paid to do. They deny this, of course, and pretend that they're somehow acting in the public benefit. They are not. When they refuse to even answer a 40-year avionics engineer stating, corroborating, confirming that something very horrible is going on in our skies, and they won't even answer that, and they won't meet the public to address questions, they have no desire to really behave in a moral fashion. That simple. So continuing with the gas leak, because we know the Southern California gas leak would not have been disclosed. If they could have hidden it, they would have. They certainly tried to for a time until it was discovered. Same in Texas. The headline continues: Texas, after the mammoth methane gas leak that spewed uncontrollably from a damaged well in California's Aliso Canyon was finally capped last week, residents of nearby Porter Ranch began trepidatiously returning to their homes. Lingering doubts over whether Southern California Gas Company will continue using the underground storage field have left many wondering if concerns for their safety are being considered at all, particularly considering the company has so far only been charged with misdemeanor violations. Think about that, for a crime that big. The report continues. All told, the Aliso Canyon leak thrust an estimated 96,000 metric tons of potent methane, not to mention benzene, nitrogen oxides, and other noxious substances into the atmosphere over a period of months. So vast was the impact of the leak that has been likened in impact and scope to BP's Deepwater Horizon oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Continuing with the report, Texas is dealing with a comparable disaster that has been overlooked by officials and the media. Overlooked or hidden? We should ask ourselves that. In part because the state's methane emanates from a powerful industry infrastructure, according to the Texas Observer's author of the article. Every hour, natural gas facilities in northern Texas, the Barnett Shale region, emit thousands of tons of methane. Every hour. Think about that. A greenhouse gas at least 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Now, I want to stop on that particular point because that's another media climate science lie of sorts, that methane is 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. That's over a 100-year time horizon. Over a 10-year time horizon, methane is 100 times or more potent than carbon dioxide. Over a 30 to 60-day period, methane can be 1,000 times more potent a greenhouse gas. It's much more dire than we're being told on every front. The leaks in Texas are also releasing a slate of noxious pollutants such as nitrogen oxides and benzene. A quote from this article: the Aliso Canyon leak was big. The Barnett leaks combined are even bigger. At its peak, the SoCal gas leak emitted 58,000 kilograms of methane per hour. By comparison, researchers with the universities of Colorado and Michigan, partnering with the Environmental Defense Fund, estimate around 60,000 kilograms are spewed every hour by over 25,000 natural gas wells in operation at the Barnett Shale, with the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex at the center. This amounts to around 544,000 tons of methane every year. But contrary to the magnitude of the Aliso Canyon event, emissions caused by oil and gas extraction from the Barnett Shale and the second largest formation, Eagle Ford Shale, won't cease as long as hydraulic fracturing remains the boon it has been to the fossil fuel industry. How many people have seen the natural gas commercials that claim how wonderfully safe for the environment all this is? Total lies. We are swimming in a sea of total deception. And why is this happening? How can this happen? What facilitates it? The same kind of media lack of coverage that I outlined in the beginning of the show, from people who claim to be defending the public's good, if you will, exposing truth to the public, but are doing everything to not expose that truth, doing everything to spin that truth based on their own biases and lack of investigation. And again, as dire as all these methane leaks are, what's happening above our heads every day is even more dire. Every breath you take is laden with toxic heavy metal particulates, and we know this. We're not speculating. We're not hypothesizing. This is not theory. We have lab tests to prove it. So I invite people to actually look at the data and not just talk to one of your friends, as Mr. Mangus did, and form your conclusion on that, and thus betray the population by not allowing them to get at the truth. That's what we have happening. And in regard to methane, again, in the climate science community, when we have climate science and meteorologists, scientists, stating that methane may add to global warming, do we really need to have a person with a degree to tell us something like that? That's like saying if you leap off a 100-story building, you may get hurt. This is the sort of world we live in, that we have academicians that are simply paid to deceive in many ways and to spin or downplay the truth, the reality. So let's move on to what did Snowden say about what's happening in our skies, geoengineering chemtrails. And he did say something, and many tried to debunk this. I believe what was published is absolutely accurate. It says everything we would expect it to say from government documents. So let me read this piece regarding what Snowden said about geoengineering chemtrails. Moscow, Russia. Edward Snowden, the hacker who gained access to every secret corner of the internet during his tenure at NASA, has come forward with details of a classified project to alter the world's climate. The shocking truth, as he says, is that chemtrails, geoengineering, are part of a benevolent program. I'll comment about this later because these programs are certainly not benevolent. Part of a benevolent program aimed at countering global warming. By cooperating in secret with jet fuel manufacturers, government agents have carefully kept the massive chemtrail geoengineering efforts, completely under wraps. Again, about the chemtrails term. It's not a science term. Snowden used it because it's what the public relates to, but not a science term. Encourage people to stick to the science terms. Geoengineering, stratospheric, aerosol geoengineering, so forth. But continuing with this report from Snowden. Government agents have carefully kept the massive chemtrail efforts completely under wraps. Snowden added, quote, I am only revealing this program because there is no oversight in the scientific community, for reasons I've already outlined. No public discussion, already outlined that because we have so-called journalists who are doing their best to hide the issue. Snowden's elaborating on that. And little concern for the side effects, which are well known only to a few privileged people interested in continuing the decades-long chemtrail geoengineering program in secret. The report from Snowden continues, because climate change is a threat to U.S. agriculture, it has been labeled a national security issue with the influence and cooperation of Monsanto, a secret geoengineering lab has been operating since the late 1960s, and the chemtrail geoengineering programs are often referred to by insiders as the military's crown jewel. North America's climate, the project is directed at North America's climate at all costs, even if that means accelerating desertification in sub-Saharan Africa. We're seeing that, aren't we? Getting worse by the day. Or spreading trace amounts of carcinogens over highly populated areas. I just talked about that. Lab tests prove it. Other side effects which scientists at the secret geoengineering lab have predicted include droughts. How much of that are we seeing around the globe, especially in California? Also droughts in the Amazon and powerful windstorms along the East Coast. Final paragraphs from the report. Snowden shared decisive documents with the Internet Chronicle, but out of concern for national security, only his testimonial can be published. These documents contain references to scientists who would surely be targeted by foreign counterintelligence or perhaps our own government. And their knowledge is vital to short-term survival of the United States. If these scientists were disclosed, certainly a lot of people would want to ask them a lot of questions, and they would become perhaps targets of our government if they spoke out. Snowden said, if this program were to stop, the scientists behind it strongly believe that within just 1 year, the North American climate would spiral out of control, and crop failures would lead to a series of devastating famines that would quickly depopulate urban areas. Final paragraph. Because the program has been carried out on such a massive scale, skeptics might find Snowden's story unbelievable. However, Snowden explained that the chemtrail geoengineering program has been incredibly easy to hide, especially with the cooperation of jet fuel companies, a crucial part of the military-industrial complex. Snowden said the chemtrails, which are released by passenger airlines, have been covertly introduced as a, quote, additive, supported to improve efficiency. Only as the plane reaches cruising velocity does the heat and atmospheric pressure cause the chemical reaction that synthesizes the top-secret carbon-trapping molecule. This process is imperfect, and many of the byproducts are incredibly dangerous, even in trace quantities. The most dangerous thing is that although the chemtrails, again, that's the non-scientific term, but we'll use it in this case, are keeping the climate of the U.S. reasonably stable, citizens are bombarded every day with an invisible rain of carbon-laden molecules, and the effect on health is totally unknown. Again, it's not unknown. Just like we had the earlier comment about methane could warm the planet, and comparing that to if you leap off a building or jump in front of a speeding truck, you could get hurt. Of course, the answer is clear. We just have a climate science community that is afraid to tell it like it is because the media then tears them apart. The same kind of media that I've been outlining in this entire broadcast. In regard to what Snowden said here, again, it's exactly what we would expect government documents to state, that this is somehow for the common good, it's making things better, not worse, just like Agent Orange was for the common good in the government's mind. It serves their purpose. It doesn't serve the purpose of the population. It doesn't serve the purpose of the environment or the planet. It serves the purposes of those in power who are capitalizing off the decimation that's being caused in too many ways to outline. And they are attempting to hide, this is crucial, climate engineering is many, many things. It's crucial to understand that. It's not just this or that. It's many things. But a primary element is they are trying desperately to hide the damage already done to the climate system while doing yet more damage at the same time. And in regard to what we see in the skies only being from fuel additives, data does not support that. Film footage does not support that. That is one aspect of climate engineering, what I believe Snowden would have found and been able to disclose. But we know that materials are actually being sprayed because we have film footage of military tankers at altitude spraying, turning on and off with the nozzles visible. We have up-close photographs of these nozzles. I sent a lot of this to Mr. Kruger and Mr. Mangus also. Obviously, they didn't look. They simply talked to a friend and walked away with the conclusion without doing any investigation. I'm asking the public to investigate. Think for yourselves, because this concerns your life, your future, your children's futures. Looking the other way won't make the problem go away. Why is all this going on? Again, the climate is disintegrating. Climate engineering is one of the major factors fueling that disintegration, but not the only factor. Here's a recent article to tell us how bad it actually is. Earth is warming 50 times faster than when it comes out of an ice age. Brand new article. A major new study includes some scary implications about how rapidly humans are changing Earth's climate. Now again, when you spray particulates in the atmosphere all around the globe, how could that not have a massive effect? Anybody who questions this, if you simply look up, don't believe me, don't believe anybody, look up all through the course of a day and see how on many days this emission from jet aircraft eventually covers the entire sky. No natural clouds, and ask yourself, how in the world could that not affect the climate? Of course it affects the climate. Picture that on a global scale, and that's what we have. On a global scale, we have global dimming. Look up that science term, global dimming. 30% of the sun's direct rays that reached the planet 30 years ago no longer do. How could that not affect the climate? And yet we have quote-unquote journalists like Mike Mangus telling us it's impossible for humans to affect the climate. And what does he base that conclusion on? Because some friend from the airline industry told him so. I'm asking people to think for yourselves, period. This report about the Earth warming 50 times faster continues. Recently, The Guardian reported on a significant new study published in Nature, Climate Change, finding that even if we meet our carbon reduction targets and stay below 2 degrees C of warming, sea level rise will eventually inundate coastal cities around the world. It's going to happen. It is happening. They're already pumping out every high tide in Miami. Think about this. The report continues. The authors looked at past climate change events and model simulations of the future. They found a clear, strong relationship between the total amount of carbon pollution humans emit, not mentioning methane again because they hide half of the issue, and how far global sea levels will rise. The issue is that ice sheets melt quite slowly, but because carbon dioxide stays in the atmosphere for such a long time, the eventual melting and associated sea level rise are effectively locked in. They're locked in. It's done. When you crash through the guardrail on your car and you're free-falling to the bottom of the canyon, it doesn't matter if you put the brakes on at that point, does it? And that's exactly where we're at. And that's exactly why they're climate engineering, trying to hide the severity of what's happening so the population doesn't panic, while fueling the problem at the same time. This is the military-industrial mentality. This is the mainstream medicine pharmaceutical mentality. Again, how many commercials do all of us watch that say, take this new pharmaceutical for whatever ailment, and by the way, the rest of the commercial is filled up with 20 or 30 things that are horrifically worse than the symptom you were trying to treat to begin with, and we're supposed to take this sort of poison, and this is the same mentality that's happening in our atmosphere. It's important to understand this mentality. Back to now the journalism that we don't have. And again, this is another recent letter that I just sent to Mr. Mangus and Mr. Kruger. I was recently accused of fear-mongering by a substitute host on Reading Radio and told that it was all lies, there was nothing wrong with the ocean, nothing going on in our skies, that there was no seals dying, there was no problem with the fish or the fisheries. It was all just conspiracy theory and hoax. So here's a headline from a major source. Energy News, also the Press Democrat. Crisis along U.S. West Coast. We're facing a fishery disaster. Quote, very never seen before things. Should be an exclamation alarm to public. Extinction threat for salmon runs. Loss of sardines, squid, sea urchins, kelp, massive sea star deaths, marine mammal strandings, and more. Again, from the Press Democrat. The situation is overwhelmingly grim. Another excerpt from the Press Democrat. Something's going on in the ocean, and it's not right. It doesn't fit our historical understandings. Again, statements from climate scientists. Do they really need a degree to tell us something so simple? Another excerpt from the Press Democrat. Collapse or near collapse of salmon runs. I cannot say this more bluntly, State Senator Mike McGuire said, we're facing a fishery disaster here in California. Now, it seems there was harsh reality to what I've tried to disclose for years in my disseminations. Years. Where is KRCR's and the Record Searchlight's coverage of such a massive and dire marine ecosystem and fishery collapse? Where is the coverage? That's all I'm asking. The fact that many are willing to ignore this is not going to make it go away. Now, when we get to why are we not hearing about this from meteorologists. I again point out, and I mailed this article as well to Mr. Mangus and Mr. Kruger. We have the entire National Weather Service and all National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, all their employees, all their meteorologists, all their climate scientists are under a federal gag order. Think about that. A federal gag order. If you don't believe it, look at the documents. They're posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. They were sent to Mr. Kruger. They were sent to Mr. Mingus. But that was also ignored because of some opinion from a friend that worked for an airline industry. Now, we also have other incidents like, again, I've mentioned in the past, the Weather Channel meteorologist that was found and diagnosed as suicided 2 weeks ago. His parents are seriously questioning that diagnosis. That was premature. And they state that, quote, from his mother, he was happy, he was at a good place in his life. That's why we have questions. The suicide doesn't make sense. Now, what did he know? Was he going to speak out? And this is not a unique situation. We had a number of other climate scientists died in similar circumstances. This meteorologist ran his car through a block wall. It's a strange way to commit suicide. And we have similar circumstances with a number of other scientists last year that were so anomalous that the most recognized Arctic scientist, climate scientist, Peter Wedhams, stated on the record initially that he thought that these people were being taken out. So again, why would we expect otherwise if something so incredibly lethal as climate engineering was trying to be hidden? And it is. They are trying desperately to hide this, because how will the population react all over the globe? And we have all the major powers participating in this, by the way. Russia, China, all of them are participating. And the 750-page congressional document that I mentioned again and again outlines the fact that global powers, even normally adversarial powers, are to cooperate on the climate engineering issue. Look at the document. It's there. So we have, again, we have a society full of order followers. Those who don't question, those who are more concerned about their paycheck and their pension than they are about morality and their obligation to the society that they claim to represent. And as I've outlined also in recent shows, experiments like the Milgram experiment, which was an experiment in the 60s that proved if people felt they were following some authority, they would do horrible things to other people because they're just following orders. In fact, an excerpt from the researchers in this experiment, one excerpt to drive this point home. With numbing regularity, good people were seen to knuckle under the demands of authority and perform actions that were callous and severe to other individuals. Men who are in everyday life responsible and decent were seduced by the trappings of authority, by the control of their perceptions, and by the uncritical acceptance of the experimenter's definition of the situation into performing harsh acts on others. A substantial portion of the people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. The quote-unquote experts. We do whatever they tell us to do. I want to read and finish with an excerpt from a book called The Wages of Rebellion, from Chris Hedges, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, certainly a warrior of truth. And to everybody who hears this, everybody who is dedicating themselves to the common good, to the greater good, and has abandoned their fear of ridicule and marginalization because they want to stand for justice no matter what, this that I'm about to read is addressed to you. Think about it. This is who you are, and I want you to know this, all those that are fighting for the common good. Again, this excerpt from the book, Wages of Rebellion. Those who defy the forces of injustice and repression are possessed by a sublime madness in the soul, which disregards immediate appearances and emphasizes profound and ultimate unities. Sublime madness demands self-sacrifice and entails the very real possibility of death. Not that the rebel possessed of sublime madness wants to die, for the fight against radical evil is the ultimate affirmation of life. The rebel understands that terrible power of the forces arrayed against all rebels, and how far these forces, once threatened, will go to silence rebels, and yet so possessed that he or she is unable to conform. The rebel, dismissed as impractical and zealous, is chronically misunderstood. Those cursed with timidity, fear, or blindness, and those who are slaves to the opportunism, call for moderation and patience. They distort the language of religion and spirituality, compromise and generosity and compassion to justify cooperation with the system of power that is bent on our destruction. The rebel is deaf to those critiques. The rebel hears only his or her inner voice, which demands steadfast defiance. Self-promotion, positions of influence, the adulation of the public, and the awards of prominent positions that come with bowing before authority mean nothing to the rebel. Who understands that virtue is not rewarded? The rebel expects nothing and gets nothing. But for the rebel to refuse to struggle, to refuse to rebel, is to commit spiritual and moral suicide. You do not become a dissident just because you decide one day to take up this most unusual career. You are thrown into it by your personal sense of responsibility, combined with a complex set of external circumstances. You are cast out of the existing structure and placed in a position of conflict with it. It begins as an attempt to do your work well and ends with being branded an enemy of society. The dissident does not operate in the realm of genuine power at all. He's not seeking power. He has no desire or office and does not gather votes. He does not attempt to charm the public. He offers nothing and promises nothing. He can offer, if anything, only his own skin, and he offers it solely because he has no other way of affirming the truth he stands for. His actions simply articulate his dignity as a citizen, regardless of the cost. The rebel, possessed of sublime madness, speaks words that resonate only with those who can see through the facade. The rebel functions as a prophet. He or she has what Leo Tolstoy described as the three characteristics of prophecy. First, it is entirely opposed to the general idea of the people in the midst of whom it is uttered. Second, all who hear it feel its truth. And thirdly, above all, it urges men to realize what it foretells. The message of the rebel is disturbing because of the consequences of the truth he or she speaks of. Again, to all those engaged in the battle for the common good, this is you. This describes you and your courage to face the opposition of family, friends, acquaintances, and to stand unyielding to the storm that gathers around us, to stand for the truth, to exercise the only thing that any of us own correctly, our will. The correct use of our will is the only thing in our power. Everything else can be taken from us. A final summary from the Wages of Rebellion. I do not know if we can build a better society. I do not even know if we will survive as a species. But I do know that those corporate forces have us by the throat, and they have my children by the throat. I do not fight fascists because I will win. I fight fascists because they are fascist. And this is the fight that in the face of overwhelming forces against us requires that we follow those possessed by the sublime madness, that we become stone catchers and find in acts of rebellion the sparks of life, the intrinsic meaning that lies outside the possibility of success. We must grasp the harshness of reality at the same time as we refuse to allow this reality to paralyze us. People of all creeds and people of no creeds must make an absurd leap of faith to believe, despite all the empirical evidence around us, that good draws to it the good. The fight for life goes somewhere. The Buddhists call this karma. And by these acts, we make possible a better world, even if we cannot see one emerging around us. All of us have an obligation to stand unyielding in the fight for the greater good. Make your voice heard. Investigate what's happening around you. This is Dane Wigington with GeoEngineeringWatch.org.